I want to welcome all of you to our final lecture of the 2021-22 session. Please turn off your camera and you can leave your camera on if you want. And turn off your microphone so we don't get extraneous noise while the speaker is talking. Our speaker tonight is Claudia Smith, a local and prolific author who's going to talk about history on the hoof, or a history of local horses in the area, which I think is quite a different style of presentation than we're used to, but it should be really fun and interesting. Questions are welcome. If you have a question during the talk, could you use the chat feature, which I will try to monitor as best I can, and then I'll be responsible for interrupting Claudia and getting an answer from her. After the presentation, of course, it's time to ask questions directly, and you can please do that with your raise your hand feature of Zoom. The Almonte lectures have been going now for about 17 years, I think. All a labor of love, done by volunteers. Right now, there are 4 of us who get the show on the road. And I'd like to mention their names because they've done so much. There's Mel Turner, who's responsible for the internet connections. There's Jan Johns, who's also responsible for the internet connections. And there's Glenda Jones, who does our publicity. I'll have more to say about them at the end of the lecture. I wanted to say a few words about Claudia Smith. Horses have long been an important part of Claudia's life. Over the past 35 years, while gathering histories from rural Lanark County, any mention of horses was quickly noted down. Claudia has documented the color of rural life in several hundred articles published in the Lanark era and in 8 books, including When the Sugar Bird Sings, Gypsies, Preachers, and Big White Bears, and Country Roads as well. Off to a typical Warren Zoom start. Anyway, she's recently published a new book, and I'd like to hold it up and say nice things about it. This is the book, available at fine bookstores, most places, certainly here, and well worth the effort to buy it and read it. Okay, the title of Claudia's lecture is History on the Hoof. Thank you very much, Claudia, for taking the time and effort to put together your lecture. Now I'm going to stop talking and please invite you to begin. Thank you.
Can everybody see the cover of my book up there on the screen? Yes? Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm very glad to be part of this lecture tonight. And this is my first presentation on Zoom, so let's just hope I hold it all together here. Thank you to Mel Turner, Warren Thorngate, and Gord Harrison for helping me with the tech support. My lecture is going to focus on the history of the working horses celebrated in this, my latest book, Horses of the Country. I will be sharing a selection of photographs and read some excerpts from the book. Horses have been a lifelong passion for me. The look of them, the smell of them, the rocking rhythm of the canter, and the welcoming knickers in the barn. The first horse that came into my life was pulling a milk wagon at my grandparents' place in Belleville. There were no horses when I was a youngster. And so every time I visited my grandparents, I was watching for that milkman's horse. And I would follow the horse down the street rather, and would pat the horse every time it stopped. I've been collecting oral history from elderly farming families for over 30 years. Sitting around kitchen tables, walking in pastures and fields to find remnants of old farms and stone things that were from times past. As Warren mentioned, I have written 8 books of rural history, and one of them was called Barns, A Reflection of Changing Times. Now, when I wrote this book, I have lots of horse stories and history in there with them, but I had a tremendous amount of information left over. So I thought that I would gather all that together and do a book to pay tribute to the big, patient farm horses. And I must say, the COVID days of the lockdown certainly gave me lots of time to work on it. I endeavored to find out all I could about the first horses that lived in this area and add to the history that I had already collected. Now, I moved to Lanark County in 1980, and the connection to the area's history started when a neighbor down the road told me about an Indigenous man, Joe Bay, who lived on our side road, down our side road in the 1900s, the early 1900s. My imagination was fired when he told me that Joe Bay had a fast racing horse named Lady that he would drive all the way to Arnprior and race there. And so I just had these visions of this fast horse going past our house in a buggy or a bright red sleigh. The neighbor also shared stories of the floating bridge. Now, let me just get that. So I'm just trying to get. Oh, sorry, just a second. Oh, there we go. Can everybody see the floating bridge? Okay. So the neighbor shared stories of the floating bridge that was at the end of the length of our road, and Joe Bay lived right beside this floating bridge. And there are many, many stories about this bridge and of how the horses were frightened to go across it because the logs were very undulating, and especially when the was a windy day. And so many horses had to be led across to keep them calm when the water was choppy. One time, there was a team of young horses being driven across here with a load of gravel, and they got startled somehow, and they got very tensed up, and they started to back up. And they backed and backed, and they backed right off the bridge. And the teamster had to quickly jump into the water, get them unharnessed, get them out, and then get the wagon, minus all the gravel, pulled out of the water. What's happening? We're just having difficulty getting this. Okay, what? So you're going to do it over there? Sorry, folks. So I put this slide in because this horse just doesn't look like a happy horse. And I'm thinking that if he had been driven across the floating bridge, he would have need a lot of encouragement and reassurance. Back in the 1980s, I also began to hear from the same neighbors, hearing stories about the Romany families or the gypsies, as they were called at the time. People told me about encounters with them, and the Almonte Gazette reported incidents of horse trading and when they camped at school, in schoolyards, because there was a water pump in schoolyards, and the gypsies would get their water there. Now this, I've never in all my research found a picture of the gypsy families with horses. I've seen pictures of their bardos or covered wagons, the hoop covered wagons, or their tents, but I've never seen a picture of them, of their horses. So anyway, I've got these young people that have gone to get water and are going back to their camp. The next one. I was going to tell you about how I got to pick the title of Horses of the Country. I got it from a quotation from a diary by Elizabeth Simcoe. She was the wife of Lieutenant Governor John Simcoe. In the late 1700s, she and her husband traveled by horseback, and she commented that she needed a horse of the country to be able to travel on the rough roads, the pioneer roads of Eastern Upper Canada. These uneven log trackways were laid across swampy places in the road, and they needed sure-footed horses to get along there. Mrs. Simcoe recorded her concern about her horse's legs that were in danger of slipping between the logs and being broken. And she said, quote, "The horse I am now riding had once a fall through an old bridge. Now he goes very carefully," close quotes. Other travelers of the 1820s and 30s had this to say about the horses. Horses that are proficient in the art of log walking or accustomed to dancing on the beech and maple were indispensable for getting around. Now, I presume that the horses that these people are talking about, and Mrs. Simcoe, were the nimble, hardy French-Canadian horses. These original horses were brought over from France in the mid-1600s. 1665, I think, is the first load that came over. And they were brought over on the ships, same ships that brought Les Filles de Roi, that the French king was sending over. And so he was populating the upper New France. He was populating with the workers, the horses and the women. Not to say the men didn't do any work, but Dan told me at one of my talks that these horses that came over up the St. Lawrence River on the ships were forced off the ships. I can't imagine how they did that, but the horses were forced off the ships. They had to jump, fall into the river, and swim to shore at Tadoussac. Now, I have not found any records about how many of these horses died after being at sea for so long and probably not totally well nourished at the time, and then having to jump or fall out into the river. But the horses that did survive adapted very well to the harsh conditions of the pioneer life in Lower Canada, and they reproduced in a genetic isolation and became the strong, unique French-Canadian horse. Now, these days, the breed is called just the Canadian horse. The next one. Now, this is a picture of a lumber shanty, probably up the Ottawa Valley, and I like this show. It shows them. I'm sure it's a Canadian horse that's brought some visitors to the shanty, and you can see it's got the sleigh bells across and the old cutter. Next one. And this is a hooked mat that I made of my Canadian mare and my old antique French-Canadian carriole sleigh. Now, there was another breed of horse that, no, so sorry. So the title of Horse of the Country, go back, Court. The Horses of the Country has a double meaning. So that's why it really intrigued me when I read about what's happening.
I don't know how to go back.
Sorry. Okay, there we go. We'll just leave that one on for a minute. So when I had read Mrs. Simcoe's quote about the horses of the country, it caught my mind for the horse having the double meaning of referring to the French Canadian horse that is the Canadian horse symbol, and as well as all the farm horses that worked in the countryside. And so I thought, oh, perfect title. Now there was another breed of horse that some of the British horsemen saw when they visited Canada. And one fellow in particular in 1831 was in around Chatham or in that area. He hired a team of Indian ponies. And he noted that they were very like the French Canadians, but smaller, only averaging 13 hands with iron feet and legs. These ponies were probably the present day Lacroix ponies or Ojibwe ponies. He wrote that they were very merry goers and could spin along at 9 miles an hour. They were smart and courageous when confronted with the unsure footing of a mire, around a mire or a bog in the road. And they very courageously would test with their feet. And he said they tried the difficulty with their feet, and when satisfied, they would just go through or go over. So I postulate in my book that some of the horses used to transport pioneer families after they came up from Quebec City, Montreal to Brockville and Kingston area, they hired wagons to carry all their goods up into the upper townships. And I'm thinking that some of those horses were probably these Ojibwe or Lacroix ponies. Now, as an aside, I was wondering, maybe some of you have been hearing on the radio lately about the spirit horses, the spirit ponies, or Ojibwe horses that are being raised on a farm in Ottawa. The woman who's doing it has a bunch that they're trying to preserve the breed because they nearly went extinct. And it's a breed that's indigenous to North America, and many, many people are just beginning to realize that these horses have been here since time immemorial. And they have distinct DNA. And prior to European contact, these little equines were around by the thousands in the woods. They are depicted on indigenous birch bark scrolls. And there's even a pictograph or rock painting in the Agawa Canyon of a horse in southwestern Ontario. They've been called the little horses in the big woods. If you want more information about the Ojibwe horses, you can go to the Ojibwe Horse Society site. Very interesting. They're having all kinds of discussions because people are saying, oh no, they were brought here by the Europeans and all that. And there's a lot of studies going on to show that no, they've been here for a very long time. Now, one of my challenges in writing this book was to have the text satisfy both the experienced horse person as well as people who are just horse lovers. And I didn't want to talk down to the horse people, and I didn't want to have information that would be confusing to people who didn't know too much about horses. For instance, the next one. For instance, sloop sleighs. Now, this is a set of sloop sleighs, and I mentioned them several times within the text, and then I gave a fuller explanation of what they were in the caption of the photograph. And the next one. Another one that I wanted to be sure people knew about were the term blinkers or blinders. And in around Lanark County, they are called a bridle with blinders on is called a set of blinds. So I mentioned them in the text, and so I also mentioned them in a caption. And I included this sketch because it gives a good illustration, but also so it gives an illustration for the people who might not have known what they were or noticed them before, but also it's just a nice graphic. And no, just leave it. The next challenge that I wanted to talk about that I had was doing research. When I did the research in the old periodicals and farm journals, was the term French Canadian, or no, just Canadian, because sometimes it was hard to tell within the text whether people meant that they were bred in Canada or that they were Canadian, the Canadian breed of horse. And the same thing, okay, the next one, the same thing happened with the word thoroughbred, because some people use the word to actually mean the breed, the thoroughbred breed, and other people, it meant that they had a purebred horse. So I had to really read carefully and figure out what exactly, if I could, what people were actually meaning. In the course of my research, I kept my eye out for any mention of the first horses that were used on the farms in Eastern Ontario, Upper Canada, first of all, in some of the reference material, and then on just Ontario. So in the 1850s, only one farm in 4 even had a horse. And but the story of the horses in Eastern Ontario grew slowly, but at a pace that was steady. The earliest mention that I've found was about horses. The heavier horses that were used in the lumber shanties of the Ottawa Valley in the mid-1800s. By the 1850s, horses were replacing the oxen that were working in the shanty and in the lumber industry. One lumberman hired 2,000 horses for his shanty work, 10 horses for every ox. And these horses they weighed about 1,700 pounds and worked very, very hard. So we'll have the next photo. Here are teams hauling a heavy load. And I'll just read something here about them. Shanty work was dangerous for men and horses. Skidding horses wore bells on their harness to signal their whereabouts to the cutters and teamsters, and horses heeded the men's calls of timber. And then the next one. Now here is a tremendous load. Log sleighs loaded with 25 or 30 logs must weigh about 20 tons. So you can imagine what this one weighed. Hot sand was spread on the tracks to prevent runaway loads that broke horses' legs or killed them. If the horses could not hold the load, they had to go full gallop to keep ahead of it. Sometimes teamsters used the whip to keep them running wide open all the way down the hill. Now, men love to challenge each other and their horses with brag loads, and this is a brag load. The teamsters on the high loads of logs had to be careful to keep their balance on the load and watch for branches that could swipe them off their perch. There was one load of logs that I read about, that the fellow was saying that the load of logs was so high that he only had 6 inches of rein to hold on to guide his horses. I tried to find the definitive answer to shanty horse breeds, but it was almost impossible because the only common descriptions were, it was a big team. We had big teams, we had heavy teams, the farmers' teams, And I found that a lot of the material was about the strength of the horse, the dependability of them, and the hard work that they did and the toil that it took on them, but not the breeding. It was only later in the 1800s that references to Clydesdales and Percherons by name were found. Now this Clydesdales, here's a big lovely Clydesdale. They were imported from Scotland beginning in the 1840s. The Clydes were used more in central Ontario until the farmers in Eastern Ontario, as they got more prosperous, then they started to have a better breed, more purebred breeding brought in probably the latter part of the 1800s. Now in the early 1900s, agricultural fairs did not have any classes for designated breeds. They'd have the class for the best draft horse, best draft mare, best mare with foal, but there were no classes for specific breeds. Now, by the 1920s, there were breed classes, and the farmers were being encouraged through agricultural societies to improve the breeding of their horses. Now, this great, lovely fellow was imported from Scotland, and his name was Dunure Footprint. And he was a top breeding stallion who was tragically lost in a barn fire with 4 other top stallions in 1929. And the next one, the Suffolk Punch. The Suffolk Punch horses were first imported in the 1860s. And Percherons were imported in the not until the late 1800s. And the first Belgians didn't come to Canada until 1902. So with these last two, the Percherons and the Belgians, their reputations for their strength and their versatility grew quickly. And both of these breeds became very, very popular. And of course, we still see so many of them today. Next one. Now, heavy horses were used on the farm, but lighter horses had a job on the farm as well. They took families to town, to church, to picnics, and visits with relatives. The light horses could travel faster than the heavier farm horses. Next one. And here is another light horse and a buggy full, ready to go to church. Many farms had general purpose horses that were used for both farm work and roading. And you can see this is a heavier chunk of a horse. This is a general purpose horse. Nice solid horse. Now let's take a look at some horses at work, at heavy work. Now, this is a special stone lifter that they've winched up the stone, and you can see that it's going to take 2 horses to get that pulled out of the way. So they're lifting that huge rock from a field to take it off to the side. Next one. And this is a local man doing some plowing. Plowing is heavy work for horses. This is Lyle Colleen. Maybe some of you have seen him driving his horses down around the Dwyer Hill Road because he trains his horses there, and it's a great sight to see him driving along. Next one. Here's a fellow with a wonderful gray team doing his cultivating. Next one. Now, I got to tell you, this is my mother. And she's working on a hay rake, and you can see under the horse's chin they have put a cloth under there to keep the flies out, because there are a lot of chin flies that would get in under the horse's jaws, and they would toss their head and just be totally bothered. Next one. This one, they're getting the hay put in the mow at a time before they had a hay fork to get it in, and so the men are having to work just forking it in, and then the ones inside fork it back into the loft. Hay is such a heavy load when you get a huge load of it on a wagon. Next one. Now this is another very heavy machine that the horses had to carry. This is a threshing machine, and they had to pull that. A team of horses pulled that along, and then the power for the threshing machine was a steam engine. And I'll just read something here about people at a threshing bee. At one threshing bee, a man urged his heavy draft team to pull this heavy threshing machine up into the barn where they were going to be doing the thrashing. And one fellow, he just couldn't get his horses to take it in. And they were just, I don't know whether the team was too light or whatever, but his team couldn't do it. Another one who had been born, they said, who had been born with reins in his hands, hitched his light team to a mill, and with the first man declaring all the while that there was no way this lighter team would be able to do it, the mill was drawn right in. When there was good communication through the lines or the reins from the driver to the horses, a well-trained team would get down on their stomachs to pull. One old teamster said he could hitch his team to a barn and they would try to draw it. Yeah, next one. Okay. Now for a few photos of people and their farm partners. I like this picture very much. They all just seem to be such a family grouping. The gray horse on the right has its mane tied up, and I once heard that people tied their manes up like that to protect them from having the fairies come in at night and tie up their manes in all kinds of knots. Now, I think that this one may be tied up so that it doesn't get caught all in the collar, but it's a very nice, neat knot they've tied there. Next one. Here's a proud man with his two big Clydes. And I always think that the horse on the left looks like she must have a foal in the barn, and she's thinking, come on, let's get over there. I want to see it. The next one. This one, this lady certainly has a fondness for horses. Now here's a family or a work crew taking their horses down for a drink of water at a pond. It's a bit of a fuzzy picture, but it just has a really nice feeling of the horses getting down there and for a drink and also having a rest. And the next one, isn't he a marvelous man? And the connection between him and his horse is so clear. Now I'll read you, just leave that one on. I'll read you a story about a horse who made sure that his partnership with his owner stayed fair. Shorty was a cooperative horse if used properly, but if you slapped him with the lines and were cursing at him, he would just stop. Another plow horse was able to get his own back on an impatient owner when it was given a hard chuck on its bit. Now, I'll just make a comment about when people did the plowing with walking plows. So this man, he guided the horses with their lines behind his back so that he could keep both hands on the plow stilts. And so I better get back to the quote here. Yes, so he gave signals with the reins behind his back. And this horse, who resented the chuck on its mouth, would take the bit in its teeth and stretch his neck out. And of course, with the lines behind the fellow's back, the man was pulled right up over the plow. And so he certainly decided that he would, if the horse was going to do that, he was going to be a little more understanding with his horse. Okay. Now there's a chapter about in my book called Horsing Around, which is about young people and horses. Now, you could call this one Piling on a Friend. And this patient old fellow just has a load of kids. Next one. This is the cooperative horses were made by people handling the foals a lot. And children on farms loved the foals. And this young fellow is certainly fond of his friend. And this next one, I'd like to call it A Little Help from a Friend. We'll just leave it now. And I'll share a paragraph from the chapter called Horsing Around. Am I going too fast, by the way? No? Give me a sign. So this is from Horsing Around. Fond memories included, quote, I went to the barn with Dad and he brushed the horses and I fiddled with the harness on the wall. Another one, quote, I loved to go with Dad and I always held on to the ends of the lines, pretending I was driving the team. Another one, quote, I used to have to climb in the manger to reach the buckles and snaps on the bridle to help harness the horses for my father. And quote, we had a long-handled curry comb so that kids could reach up to groom the horses. I used to go right under the horse to get to the other side. And the last quote, I used to stand by the stall and watch my dad shoe the horses, but I think I mostly just got in the road. It was usually a child's job to go for the cows at milking time, whether on foot or on horseback. Many canny old horses knew that children were not always in control, and more than one youngster was rubbed off on a low-hanging branch or taken at a gallop back to the barn. Some horses were not cooperative when children led it to beside a fence to get on from the top rail. And one person remembered, every time I was about to get on that horse and I got my leg swung over, the horse took a jig sideways and I landed on the ground. Two young girls used to ride a quiet mare to get the cows in their back pasture. And often the horse found the cows before the children could see them. Sometimes the girls were scolded for being late getting back, but they never mentioned to their parents how they liked visiting an old cemetery in the corner of the pasture and how the horse foiled their remounting when they led her by the mane to a rock. She always moved just a little step sideways when they tried to get on. And if she did not tire of this prank and let them out, that girls had to herd the cows home on foot. I have another chapter in the book called Straight from the Horse's Mouth. And in it, it talks about the bonds between horses, the bonds between people and horses, and the bonds between dogs and horses. Now, this woman's dog loved to go in the buggy. Whenever the woman was going to town or going anywhere, she went with her and stayed right with the horse when it was tied at a rail at the church or in town, and never allowed anyone to touch anything, the horse or the buggy. And the next one. And here this dog and his owner are checking out their horses, their pasture friends. Just a minute. Okay, that's fine. I have included various pieces of folklore in the book. Folklore about good luck, folklore about training advice, medical advice, as well as tips for buying a horse. Now, this is Rosie, and if you can notice on her forehead, right between her eyes, there's a whorl of in her hair. And so some of the pieces of folklore had to do with bumps on a horse's head, foot markings, and as well as quarrels. And I'll read about some of these You may have heard some of them. Where is this now? Sorry. Here we go. Folklore offers insights into buying horses, a good horse. 1 white foot try him, 2 white feet buy him, 3 white feet look well about him, 4 white feet go home without him. And then there's always this bit of pithy advice. A farting man is a man to hire. A farting horse will never tire. And if you want a good horse, get a roan. Then another person always said they looked for a rangy horse, not a farm chunk. And someone else said, if a horse has a bump on the top of its head that's a little sharp, it's usually a good tempered horse. And then there's the folk wisdom about the stars or the whorls on their foreheads. They're supposed to be an indication of temperament. 2 whorls means a troublemaker. 1 whorl above the eye level means a high-strung horse, while a single whorl between the eyes means a quiet horse that's easy to work with. If it's below eye level, it's thought to indicate a horse has an ugly temperament, is introverted, lazy, and easily bored. Now, there were slight variations in this folklore. A star on the face between the eyes meant a good horse, above the eyes meant a stupid one, and a horse with a star below the eyes was a slow horse. A long-time horseman once said that he could pick a good horse 95 times out of 100 by looking at their stars. So the next time you're looking at a horse's forehead, see what you think, if you agree with that kind of thing. Now my pages have got a bit mixed up, so we'll have to just see what's happening here. Page 27. I'm going to read a bit about the difficulties of horses, and people should have probably paid attention to the folk wisdom. So there's one farm family who unknowingly bought an obstreperous horse that was inclined to display its hind feet in an unpleasant and dangerous manner. One day, it kicked its heels over the dashboard of the buggy and struck the driver in the face. But the worst behavior was a rearing horse. And one fellow said this of a horse that he bought without following the folk wisdom, I guess. When I got him home, he stood on his hind feet and he tried to hug me. I felt like I was on the verge of eternity. Now, not all types of horses with behavior problems could be remediated, and responsible teamsters did not sell a truly dangerous animal, but had it put down. Difficult horses were named after disliked or unpopular politicians of the day. The names of famous people were given to horses, with king and queen as being the favorites. Lindy and Bird were named after the aviator Charles Lindbergh and the Antarctic explorer Admiral Byrd. Now, horses were everywhere in days past. Besides the heavy horses and the road horses used on the farm, there were horses in parades, at country fairs, in funeral processions, and pulling delivery wagons and providing the power for machines. And here are a couple of examples. Now these horses are on what's called a sweep power, and they go round and round, and the power is sent through a tumbling rod to whatever machine they are hooked up to. Now, in this instance, they are hooked up to the newspaper press for the Perth Courier. And they were out behind the newspaper office, and every Saturday morning they would be hitched up and go round and round and power the press. And this picture was taken on the last day that the sweep power was used in 1896. Next one. And this is also James Brothers is a Perth company as well. And you can see this delivery wagon has a load of stuff being taken to probably fill orders from their foundry. And this is a circus wagon coming through Perth, and there are you can see the rest of the parade off to the right there, and there's some kind of a big puppety thing in at the top of the wagon. And the next one. Now this is look at the snow they had in those days, and without snow plows. And this is a taxi from a hotel, and they would drive their people to the train station, or to maybe where they were, to a livery stable if they were going to rent a sleigh or a sleigh to go off on their travels. But this is quite a big taxi. And the next one. This is an old hearse, and this hearse is in the middle of a museum actually, and this photo was taken on a demonstration day. But the funeral processions were often very, very long. Sometimes there'd be up to 60 wagons or sleighs following a hearse, and in the winter they put the hearse on a set of bobsleighs. The next one. And this is the fire engine. And this fire engine was the first horse-drawn fire engine in Lanark County. And it was purchased in 1878. And what they would do is keep this, a fire laid in it. And then when they got a fire call, they would light the fire, and whoever was around would race to take their team to get hitched up to the fire engine, because then they would get paid, and then off they would run to the fire. Now the last working horses in the last working horses in Almonte were taken out of service in the early 1960s. The town dray horses that they picked up the garbage with were retired in 1961. And in 1962, the Metcalf Dairy put their last delivery horse out to pasture. The 1960s also saw fewer and fewer horses being used on farms and pulling the sap tanks in the maple bushes. Now, much of the history in my book and many of the stories were collected in Eastern Ontario, and so I'd like to share a few of the very local stories. When horses were groomed, the mane and tail hair was saved in a bag to sell to peddlers who came around, and mostly the children would meet the peddler and sell him a bag of the hair. The hair was used for stuffing chairs, stuffing horse collars, buggy and sleigh seats, and it was also added to plaster for the walls. It was also packed under the floorboards of dance halls to make a springy dance surface. And this is the old Temperance Hall in Watson's Corners, long gone now. And there's the tying in place underneath, the drive shed underneath for the teams to be tied in. And then the people went in the ramp, and it was a community hall for meetings, and also they held dances in there. And the reason I've got this in here is because, and I'll read about it from my book. The horse shed under the Sons of Temperance Hall in the hamlet of Watson's Corners was built in 1898. Tightly twisted coils of horse tail hair were sometimes packed under the tongue and groove floorboards in community halls to make sprung dance floors that cushioned the impact of the dancer's feet. People remember the dance floor in this hall to be very springy or bouncy, and children who played under the horse sheds remember seeing horsehair sticking out through the ceiling. So that's a bit of a history of horsehair. And the next one. Now this is the toll gate, and I'll just find the page here. This is a toll gate. There were many, many toll gates along the roads until the late 1800s, when they were people just got fed up with paying tolls, and the roads were freed. This one was on the way into Lanark Village from Perth, and there's still a toll gate road street name at its historical location. Now, one of my favorite stories about a toll gate was at the toll gate at the Scotch line between Carleton Place and Perth. Now let me find it here. Mary Reynolds, an 1880s toll keeper on the Scotch line near Perth, shared her memories of some of the colorful traffic that passed through the toll gate. They were traveling medicine shows, and traveling medicine shows, wagons sometimes with trained bear in a cage, wedding parties, groups of Romany travelers or gypsies. One time, the owner of a general store in the area teamed his wares from Perth and often was a little tipsy on his way home. So one year at Christmas time, as he was coming, he had all his goods in the back of his sleigh, and he came through the toll a little too erratically, and he left a path of bright candy in the snow as a big box of hard candy tipped out. The neighbor children were thrilled. They had never had so much candy before in their lives. Right, and then I want to revisit this picture to take a look at the harness. Both horses have plain rosettes. You can see up by their ears where the brow band meets the head stall of the bridle. There's a round silver colored ornament. That's the rosette or a bridle button. And then the horse on the left has a face piece on its forehead with a brass, it's called a horse brass on the face piece. And then the spots, you can see the silver decorations on the bridles, and the two bridles are quite different. The nose bands are different, and the brow bands are different. And the other thing they have is, then I wanted to show that they have just different the harness, the work harness. And this is a lovely photo that I feel very privileged to have been able to use. Now, I have been collecting horse ornaments since I was in grade 7. So I really enjoyed weaving all the information I have about them into my book. And so I've got a section on the horse ornaments, and I'll show you a few of them. Next one. This is a strap of horse brasses. Horse brasses were put on horses for a variety of reasons, either to advertise if they were a keg of beer, brass that would maybe be from a distillery, and ones like at the top with the crescent and the star were for good luck, and maybe the one with the harp was for Irish ancestry. Next one. These are bridle buttons too. These are for light horses. And these are glass domed rosettes or bridle buttons. Next one. These are brass ones. The bottom one would have been on a heavy horse harness or bridle rather, and then the others are for light horses. Next one. Now these would have made a very smart outfit for a horse, a smart turnout. And I found that martingale pendant with the goat, silver goat on it, on a piece of disused or discarded harness many years ago, and I treasure it. And the next one, this coach and four, they probably had that kind of very elegant harness ornaments. Go back one, Gord, can you go back? That rosette up there is silver, and it has the initial probably of the owner of the outfit. And so then this, go back. So these horses, you can see that they had on their blinkers, there looks like there's some kind of decoration on there too, as well as rosettes. One thing I can't figure out about this picture is why the people aren't inside the coach, but maybe it's too hot or something that day. And that house is still in Perth. It was the house of the Honorable John Stewart. Now, this is Babe. She was a well-respected and well-loved mare from the McDonald's Corners area. And I thought of having her on the cover at some point, but I decided to go with the four heavy horses that I did go have under the tree. Now I've listed here where you can get a copy of my book, and you could also visit my website, and read about news and reviews, and also about my barn book. But if anyone is interested in barns of Lanark County area, and you'd have to contact me, because it's not available on the website, because I only have a very few left, and it wouldn't have been very encouraging for people. So I hope this presentation has been brought back memories for you of horses in your childhood, or have shed a light on what the horses of your ancestors would have been like in their life with their horses. Now, I would be very glad to talk about anything you want to about these slides. We can try to go back if you had a specific picture that you wanted to talk about. You don't think we can do that?
Well,
we can try. And or just any questions you have about the process, about the book, about horses. Let's talk.
Does anyone have a question or a comment? We did get one comment from the chat room, Claudia, by someone here who said the Catholics used the floating bridge to get to the church.
Oh, in Ferguson's Falls. Yes, they did.
Here's another one from Jan Johns. These are amazing photos. How did you collect all of them?
Oh, people were very generous with their photo albums, and I put out the word, and people shared. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And then some of the ones I took, some of them, like the ones of the horse ornaments and that kind of thing, but mostly from old photo albums.
A couple of others from Brenda Boyd. Thank you very much, Claudia. What lovely stories woven in with your story, and wonderful photos. Penelope Adams, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have one.
Yes, Rena.
Over where I live, there are Mennonites still using horses. Do you think there's anybody in Lanark using horses now? And do you think with the price of gas, they will?
Well, I don't know of anybody that actually goes someplace with them. I know that that one fellow who was had his team on the plow that I mentioned, he does drive his horses, but it's training, I think, mostly. I don't think he's going to the store or anything.
The horse club.
Well,
And
yeah, I
not
have-
using them on a farm at all, do you know?
Well, there are horse people who use their heavy horses, mostly Belgians, for horse pulling. When horses are hitched to a heavy load and they have a contest about which team can pull the heaviest load, and that sport has become very well policed, so that the horses are not used in any way. And then there are also the people in heavy horse clubs who give demonstrations of plowing and cultivating and cutting the hay, cutting corn, grain. Yeah. But there's nobody. I don't know of anybody who is using horses. I suppose there are some people who do who want their bush cleared, and they go in with the team of horses to cut the logs and drag them out.
Another question from Janet Duncan. Yes.
Hi, Claudia, that was wonderful. I brought back wonderful, wonderful memories of horses in my life. But I did want to say that Hillary and Nick Moore just until very recently had Suffolk Punch horses, and they used them just exactly for that. They used them for forestry, but they also plowed their fields and did field work with them. It was quite fun to see them, and they had them for many years, but they've just sold the last one. I think it went to Southern Ontario, but those were Suffolk Punches, and you showed a picture in the very early part of your talk of Suffolk Punches.
They're very calm, easy horses to work with. They sound like a lovely breed. Where did these people live?
In Lanark. It's about 5 minutes south of the village. Yep.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yep.
Another question. Thanks, Janet. Another question. Do you have any more information about the mare Babe? Why was she so well known?
About who?
Babe, the mare.
Oh, Babe. Well, she's no longer with her family. She got very old and was put down. But I just loved this photograph, and there are several others of her in the book. And she just was a very well loved horse by her owner, and I love her face.
Couple of others. Lots of comments and questions here. Thank you for the fascinating talk. Can you tell us about saddles? Did people ride bareback or English saddle or even XIX side saddles?
I'm not understanding the question. I didn't hear it.
Can you tell us about saddles? Did people ride bareback or English saddles or even XIX or 19 side saddles? I have a red velvet side saddle that belonged to my grandmother from the 1890s.
Wow, that's well. I think that, do you remember the picture of the woman and she with her horse and the dog was in the buggy? I think that woman rode her horse side saddle. And when her horse died, this is an aside, but when her horse died, some neighbors came to dig the hole and put the horse in, and she brought out a very beautiful quilt that she had made, and she laid it over the horse, and the men were commenting on how here was this beautiful quilt, and they were throwing dirt in on it for this horse. But he was a very favorite horse of hers. That would have been in the 1950s. And this red saddle sounds beautiful. Where did your grandmother use it?
It's a chat.
Oh, it was a chat.
Oh, can I read another question?
Well, there was just one other thing about that people certainly, the harness makers certainly made saddles for people, and they had used special parts of the hides, the cattle hides, to for the different parts of the saddle that had to be especially soft or rolled carefully around the pommel or whatever. So certainly people did ride with the saddle, and they did ride bareback. The kids especially rode everywhere bareback. One woman was telling me that when she was a kid, her father had brought in Mustangs from the West, and she and her brother would be fooling around with these horses, and there was one that they worked with, and the father didn't realize that they were working away with this horse. And one day he came in from the fields, and here these kids were riding this horse with no reins, no bridle, nothing, just by putting their toes on the side of the horse's face, head, to go one way or another, and was perfectly trained. So that was bareback, and bridle, but no bridle either.
Just about 2 more questions and comments, if you can hold on. The gypsies you mentioned, and this one interested me, the gypsies, because I never thought of gypsies as being local. Did they have any horses providing their transportation as in England?
Yes, they did. They had horse-drawn wagons, but like I was saying, I never saw any photographs of the horses. And they also traded horses, and people thought that they would bring some horse that had something wrong with it, and they would trade it to the gypsies, because they would think, okay, they'll pull a fast one or something, but then the gypsies would trade one to them, and maybe it had been doctored up with tansy or comfrey or something, and after the medicines wore off, neither party probably got a good deal.
And perhaps one last one from Jan Johns again. I always remember waiting for the milk delivery horse with a carrot. I think that horse got a lot of treats on his round.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting reminder of how horses were so important in the past.
Everywhere. They were everywhere. It's amazing to think how horse-powered life.
All right, any last comment? Last call?
I'm trying to, but I don't know how to do it.
Oh, hi, Jean.
You just did it, Jean.
Oh, well, at least you can hear me. Just talking about how smart horses are. We bought a farm when I was 2. My parents moved out from Ottawa they bought a farm near Manotick, and my dad just loved animals, but he knew nothing about farming. Luckily, my mom had grown up on a farm. But anyway, Dad bought this horse that was supposedly come from the West, and he hoped that she would plow the garden, but she refused. So my dad had to pull the plow around. Continued on like that, ruling the place. She could open all the gaps. She didn't like to be ridden, but we loved to ride her. So we rode bareback, and she had all the tricks. You'd get on her back, and then immediately she'd go over and try to jam your leg against a fence post. And she also would take you under the chokecherry bushes to try to get you off her back. But anyway, she'd plod out so slowly. But boy, when you turned around to go home, she would take off. And I think that we were flying out behind the reins. That's how you felt when she was going so fast. Anyway, she was a lot of fun. And I think horses are incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And you can't do that in a Toyota.
I think a lot of kids can relate to heading for home at a gallop.
Yes.
And I have another story about a horse that did not like to plow. This man had a horse. The horse had been a circus horse, and it could count and do all kinds of tricks and everything. And his name was
Wow.
Satan. His name was Satan, and he just snorted and resisted being hitched to a plow. But when he was in a parade, he was in his glory and pranced around and knew where he really belonged.
I just wanted to comment that I went to school in Peterborough, and the last winter I saw the sidewalks being plowed by a horse-drawn plow was about 1972.
Ah,
And I remember it clearly because I was working at the university as well, and I was walking early in the morning in a very heavy snowfall.
yeah.
And I heard bells up ahead. And I looked up, and the snow was deeper, like up to my thighs, and I was just trudging through it up where the sidewalk should be. And I heard these bells, and I looked up, and there was this huge horse coming at me. I think it was a Percheron, or like some big heavy farm horse. And so I immediately ran off out of the way. But the next year there were snowmobiles doing that.
Oh.
They were replaced. Probably the same farmer had the contract, but he could switch to the snowmobile and leave his horse at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, Claudia, my goodness, thank you very much for a very interesting talk.
Yay.
Good for you, and applause. Real applause.
Yeah. Oh, Claudia, go.
Thank you.
And while I'm thanking people, don't go yet. I still have a few things I'd like to say. First of all, we're trying to resume the lectures next fall. So we'll have another season at least. And in part, it's thanks to the donations that many people have given to the project. So they help pay the Zoom bills and a few other things. And I'm happy that you made the effort. I'd like to thank Mel one more year, and Jan and Gloria. Oh gosh, it's Glenda. I'm mixing my words, as I say. They've been wonderful support for me, and I look forward to working with them still. If you do want to donate to the cause, if you just go to the almontelectures.com website, look at the homepage, and cast your eyes up towards the upper right-hand corner, and you'll see the word donate. Click it and watch the magic happen. Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you who've attended these lectures. It's been wonderful to see you come and get engaged in this little project. It gives me hope that there's more than just war in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have one more note, just in case I forget. Have a great summer. If you don't, I'll be very angry. Anyway, so it goes. I hope to see you in the fall.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Claudia.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.